Welcome to Grave's End. Have you ever looked up expecting to see the blue sky or a few clouds and you see something unexpected? Something you just can't explain? Well, you're not alone. There are literally thousands of reports of unidentified objects in the sky each year. Alaska is no stranger to UFO sightings, with hundreds of sightings reported each year. If you're a fanatic of the unknown, unfamiliar, and creepy tales in story format, then this channel's for you. Don't forget to click that bell for notifications, then flip over and hit that like and subscribe button at the bottom. Now on with today's story. Kenya and her husband Ben moved to Alaska right after they were married in 2012. The winters are harsh, supplies are scarce, but they had made a good home there, and they loved the isolation from the fast-paced world they were so accustomed to. They lived there happily for 5 years with their loving husky, Hunter. Hunter was adopted by Kenya and Ben shortly after they were married, so he is a big part of their family and a big part of their survival in Alaska. One cold morning in 2017, Ben had breakfast and got ready to hit the trail to check out the traps as he did every day. He kissed Kenya goodbye and started his day. Kenya watched Ben and Hunter until they were out of sight. Ben usually returned home around 7 each night, but at around 8, he and Hunter still weren't there. Kenya was a little worried, but Ben had been late before. At around 9 p.m., she heard Hunter barking, so she was relieved. She ran to the door, expecting to see Ben and Hunter making their way to the cabin. When she looked out, she only saw Hunter. Ben was nowhere in sight. This is when Kenya really got worried. She called Bill, their closest neighbor, and asked if he would go out with her to look for Ben. Kenya, Hunter, and Bill followed the trail Ben took every day. They found Ben's shotgun, but there was no sign of Ben. Ben told Kenya to call the police and report Ben missing. A massive search was immediately underway, with multiple search parties searching in different areas. But after weeks of searching, there was still no sign of Ben, and the search was finally called off. The authorities told Kenya they suspected Ben had been attacked by a large grizzly. They found large claw marks in several trees along Ben's path and told Kenya there had been several attacks in the weeks prior to Ben's disappearance. The grizzly that had attacked some of the locals and was suspected of attacking Ben was finally trapped a few months later, but this brought no solace for Kenya. Her life was forever changed. Kenya's grief was overwhelming, and life in Alaska would be hard without Ben, but this is where their life was. And where Ben's memory now is. She and Hunter decided to stay. Kenya always skinned the animals that Ben brought home. They sold the skins in town for extra money. With Ben missing now, Kenya not only had to skin the animals, she also had to set and check the traps daily. With everything that had to be done each day, this left no time for grieving and kept Kenya's mind occupied. Although it was difficult at first, she quickly grew into the daily routine and began to enjoy hers and Hunter's daily adventures in Alaska's beautiful wilderness. There were definitely some bad days, but Kenya and Hunter finally had their daily route down, and most days were making good time. Her life was now challenging, but she was quite proud of herself. Late one afternoon, Kenya and Hunter returned to the cabin after collecting their catch. She gathered some wood for the wood stove and began to prepare dinner. Kenya hadn't thought about her passion for photography in a while, but being surrounded by the beauty of Alaska, she decided to dig out her old camera. Before Kenya and Ben got married and moved to Alaska, this was her passion, and she spent almost every weekend in the mountains taking pictures. She even framed and sold a few back then. She didn't have a lot of time to commit to what was once her passion, but thought she could take some pictures along the trail. For the first time since Ben went missing, Kenya had something to look forward to, and this brought a little smile to her face. Shortly after dinner and tidying up, Kenya and Hunter got ready for bed. Even though Kenya was excited about going out the next day, She was tired and wanted to make sure she got a good night's rest. Kenya knew she would have to be careful and keep track of time. Even though it didn't get dark until around 11 p.m., Kenya and Hunter still had a routine they needed to maintain. Each night, as Kenya would lay in bed and try to fall asleep, she would stroke Hunter's head, and he would lick her fingers. Now, over the next few days, in between traps, Kenya took a lot of pictures, and she now had quite a few furs. So the following morning, Kenya and Hunter loaded up and headed to town. When they arrived at the fur exchange, Chad, one of the workers who worked there, came out and helped Kenya carry the furs inside. While she was waiting, she overheard two men talking. One of the men said he was out in the woods and something in the sky was following him. He said it looked like a huge drone, and it seemed to hover as if it was watching him. He also said it was very fast. It would shoot up in the sky, then back down in a second or two. The other gentleman said one of his friends described the same thing, but also added it was late at night and a blinding light woke him up. When he looked out the window, he saw a metallic saucer hovering in his yard. Kenya interrupted and asked what they thought it was. John, who sighted the object in the woods, said he didn't know and didn't want to find out. He admitted he did get a little scared. Kenya talked to them a few minutes longer. She then collected her money, said goodbye, and didn't give any more thought about the shiny object in the sky. Kenya was very skeptical about things like this. She didn't think they were lying, but thought perhaps they may be embellishing a little. She certainly didn't think it was a UFO. She figured, if anything, it was something to do with the military. She and Hunter went to a few more stores and picked up their monthly supplies, then headed back to the cabin. It was late when they returned, and she knew the next day was going to be tough, so she and Hunter ate dinner and went straight to bed. Kenya quickly fell asleep and woke up to Hunter barking. It was almost like a growl, and he was pacing back and forth in front of the window. Sleepily, she went to the window and peeked out. She knew it was late because it was dark out. She saw what looked like a man in the distance. He must have noticed her because he took off running. Kenya grabbed her shotgun, opened the door, and fired a shot into the air. Hunter took off running and barking. A few yards out, Hunter just stopped and started looking around. Right then, the sky lit up. The light was blinding. Kenya screamed for Hunter, and they both ran inside. The blinding light lit up the yard for about 20 to 25 seconds. Then the yard quickly went dark again. Shaken and confused about what just happened, she was unable to go back to sleep, worrying that whoever was outside could return. Kenya played everything out in her mind over and over again. She couldn't figure out who the man could be and what those bright lights were. With her cabin being in such a remote location and the nearest neighbor being over 2 miles away, she couldn't figure out how they got there. She never heard an engine and couldn't explain the bright lights. She thought about the conversation she had in town with the two men and thought maybe they were trying to scare her. For a brief moment, she wondered if it could have been Ben, but knew if it was, he would have come inside. She kept her shotgun and Hunter close and decided that if she couldn't sleep, she would go ahead and do some work in the dark room. As she's developing the pictures, she couldn't believe how good they turned out. She really captured the beauty of Alaska. After she got them all hung, she noticed one picture that had something odd in the sky. It looked like a metallic oval object, just like the men described. She then began questioning whether it was really a man she saw outside the window. She started looking at the other pictures more closely and noticed the object in a couple of the other pictures at different trap sites. In one of the photos, she saw what looked like someone standing behind some trees, but couldn't tell for sure. This is when Kenya began to get concerned about what this could be. She thought about the conversation in town again and really began to think something might be going on. Did something follow her and hunt her home? A few hours passed and the sun began to rise. Even though Kenya was extremely tired and a little scared, she knew her and Hunter had to get ready to go out on the trail. They didn't go out the day before, so they had to go out today and collect their catch and reset the traps. Trapping was their livelihood and what got them through the winter months. As the two of them made their way, Kenya was taking more photos than she had previously, and honestly seemed to be more interested in that over the traps. After the fifth trap, Kenya noticed something flying above her and Hunter. It was an oval-shaped object that was just resting in one spot. She quickly pulled her camera up and started snapping photos. As she watched the object, she started to make her way to the next trap. This is when Kenya noticed the object seemed to be following her. Not once did she take her eyes off the object, and it really didn't seem to move, but somehow it was always the same distance from her, even though she was moving. This was creeping Kenya out, so she called for Hunter, and they turned around to head home. Once she was about a mile away from the cabin, the object was still hovering above her. Concerned it would find out where she lived, she took a detour and stopped by her neighbor Bill's. When Bill opened the door, Kenya pointed to the sky and screamed, "That thing is following me." Bill looked up, confused at what he was looking at. Then not long after, maybe around 3 minutes, the object just descended until it was out of sight. Unsure of what they had both just seen, they didn't say very much. Then shortly thereafter, Bill gave Kenya and Hunter a ride home. Once home, Kenya went straight to the darkroom and began developing the pictures she had taken. And there in the photographs, clear as day, was the object just hovering in the sky. Kenya took a lot of pictures of this object that had been following her, but at the end of the day, she just had a handful of pictures with a mysterious object in the sky. No clue as to what it was, and in the pictures you could really only make out the shape, which was an oval-shaped object with no wings or propellers. After looking at all the photos, she decided even though she didn't have any skins to sell, that she had to go to town the following day and talk with someone about what her and Bill had seen. As Kenya laid in bed, thoughts about what had followed her filled her mind. She began to wonder whether the object could have had something to do with Ben going missing. Kenya, worried about the day's events, closed her eyes as Hunter tried to comfort Kenya by licking her fingers. A few hours later, Kenya woke up to Hunter barking again. This time, however, he wasn't looking out the window, but instead, it almost looked as if he was guarding the doorway into her room. She quickly jumped out of bed and grabbed a shotgun leaning against the wall. Once armed, she made her way through the cabin and thankfully found nothing. She finally crawled back into bed, but she was anxious to head into town to try and find out some answers. The following morning, Kenya and Hunter loaded up and headed towards town. She went by the local police station and showed them the picture she had taken of the mysterious object that followed her. They were all shocked, but finally they had some actual evidence to corroborate some of the locals' claims of seeing something in the sky that also followed them. Kenya also told the police about someone being outside her window. They told Kenya that they would come by her place and look around to possibly find tracks or anything that could lead them to whoever was outside her place. This eased some of Kenya's concerns, but overall she was still a little worried that whoever or whatever would return and continue to harass her. As she was leaving the station, she overheard one of the officers talking about another person who had went missing. But it was who went missing that terrified Kenya. The same man who claimed to have been followed by the object a few days prior at the fur exchange never returned home, and a group of volunteers were going out to look for him. It was at this point Kenya was convinced that whatever was following her must have had something to do with Ben going missing as well. She bought some more ammunition from a local gun store and headed home. A couple of hours later, a police officer and some of the locals showed up at Kenya's. She showed them where the person she saw outside her window was standing, but unfortunately there were no tracks around. They explained that the person she saw that night could have been the man who was now missing, and if she sees anyone else, to call them immediately. The rest of the day was uneventful, but that night Hunter again woke Kenya up in the middle of the night barking and growling at something. And again, she searched the cabin and found nothing, so she went back to sleep. When Kenya woke up the next morning, she dreaded going back out to check the traps, but it was something she had to do. Hunter led the way, and Kenya followed, making really good time. After everything that had been going on, she didn't bother taking pictures on the trail because she simply wanted to get home as soon as possible. It seemed as if a new routine had started. Hunter would wake Kenya up with barking every night, and the following day she would be on edge checking the traps. Something Kenya had started to enjoy was quickly becoming a nightmare, and she dreaded collecting the animals from her traps. Kenya contemplated leaving Alaska to start an easier life, but hesitated, thinking by some miracle maybe Ben would make it home. After a little over a week, Hunter stopped barking in the middle of the night, and this eased some of Kenya's concerns. Maybe whatever was going on was over, and her life could get back to normal. After a couple of days of nothing unusual happening, Kenya started to relax a bit. She and Hunter would check the traps and get back home in what seemed like record time. All was going well until one night when Kenya woke up and noticed Hunter outside her window staring into the tree line. Not knowing how Hunter got outside, she went to the door and it was standing wide open. With shotgun in hand, she yelled at Hunter to come back inside. Hunter turned and looked at her, but instantly turned back to the tree line and barked as if he wanted her to see something. Kenya stepped inside and grabbed her camera off a table. As she pointed the camera towards the tree line, she snapped a photo. When the camera flashed, it sent chills down her spine. The flash from the camera reflected at least 15 sets of eyes staring back at her. She screamed and dropped her camera, causing it to break. This caused Hunter to come running back towards the house. Kenya called the police, and after about 40 minutes, they showed up. As they searched the nearby woods, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and they couldn't find any tracks or signs of anything being around her property. Kenya was very upset. She knew what she had saw. She told the police she wasn't making it up. One of the officers, who realized how scared Kenya was, agreed to stay in his vehicle overnight in case whatever she had seen came back. Now, knowing moments earlier her cabin was surrounded by things watching her, falling asleep was just impossible. The next day, Kenya didn't bother checking the traps, worried that whatever was out there would be watching her. Last night was the final straw. She decided it was time to leave Alaska and called her parents to let them know what had been going on. She told them she was coming to stay with them for a while. Kenya's parents both quickly agreed and were glad to hear she was finally going to move on from such a hard lifestyle. The rest of that day, Kenya was packing up some belongings she intended to take with her. The time seemed to disappear as the sun began to set. Laying in bed, thinking about what had happened the night before, Kenya couldn't wait to get out of there. As she was petting Hunter, she slipped into a light sleep. She woke up and her room was extremely cold, but thought she couldn't have been asleep long because Hunter was still licking her fingers. She was about to get up to make sure the wood stove still had wood when she heard some clicking coming from the hallway. She knew that clicking because she heard it every day. It was Hunter walking down the hallway. As she looked out her bedroom door into the hall, she saw Hunter walk by, but he wasn't alone. A man was with him. As he reached the door, he stopped and turned. He's now staring right at her. As her eyes began to focus, she couldn't believe it. It was Ben. Ben was home. He was standing in the doorway. At that very moment, Kenya became paralyzed with fear. She couldn't move. She couldn't scream. What seemed to be Ben in the doorway began to change. Who she thought was Ben was now transforming into this humanoid creature. It had big black eyes and a head that looked too large for its body. As this creature began to form, Hunter began growling. Right then, Kenya had a terrifying realization. If Hunter was in the hallway with this thing, what was licking her fingers? We hope you enjoyed today's story. And once you hit that like and subscribe button at the bottom, make sure to tuck your fingers and toes well inside the bed, or you may wake up to something licking your fingers.